Just how did Manor Lords defy the AAA studios and climb the ranks of the Steam wishlist to garner over 3 million followers and become the most played city builder of all time with over 170,000 concurrent players? How did its Discord server gain tens of thousands of members even before its release, when it's an indie game primarily designed by one guy? And for one of my personal niches, how did what amounts to a comparatively minor part of the game, smaller battles with currently no flashy sieges, cavalry or artillery, dragons or magic, ignite the minds of tens if not hundreds of thousands of people who are used to the massive battles of games like Total War? I'll tell you, because I think the answer is quite simple, and it's that Manor Lords, contrary to many of the traditional giant AAA game studios out there, feels like it's taking its players seriously, respects them, and that comes across in a multitude of ways. Let's talk about the arguably most important of these ways first, because I think to a lot of people, and perhaps even you watching right now, feel the same way, namely history and authenticity. Back in the day, say the late 90s and the early 2000s, the strategy genre was dominated by history games, whether they took place in ancient Egypt, Rome, the Middle Ages, and so on and so forth. Now, games were not the reason I fell in love with history, that part came first, but the two certainly fueled each other. However, in my mind, even though certain historical games could be fun, I always had in the back of my mind that they were held back by the technology of the times, and couldn't imagine what the future would hold. I'd look at Rome Total War back in the day and just envision what a new Rome game would look like 20 years later, and imagine that world. I'd look at Age of Empires and long for the day when these visuals would truly look realistic, and we could fight historical battles and build our cities in a much more immersive and authentic fashion. In short, I really believe that the games I played would grow and expand with me, that the future always held bigger and better things, particularly because in the early 2000s, they almost always did. Age of Empires pretty much just remained Age of Empires. In fact, in some ways, it feels like it took a step back, regressing after the beautiful third installment, which did pursue revolutionary visuals, to now a much more stylized and cartoony world than ever. Civilization, which never was my favorite franchise, but which nevertheless was fun enough and felt like it had a cool future, ended up with Civ 6. And again, those cartoony, child-friendly visuals appeared, its game design remaining virtually identical to the former games. And as for Total War, well, there used to be a time when each new game held that promise of a bigger, more detailed, and more impressive world. But at some point, even this series stopped at true innovation, that attention to history and ever deeper gameplay. And this amounted to, at least this is what it feels like, that the series decided to abandon its original selling point and to leave behind a large part of its fanbase to cater to completely different philosophies in game design. Because you see, it's not just the fact that Total War was a historical series that made me like it. At the end of the day, those games would for me have been very little if not for the details. Details and challenges which told me that the game developers respected me and valued my time and investment. Simulation-like features like populations, freedom of building, freedom of armies, dotting the landscape with fort placements, general speeches, ever more realistic and larger battles with the campaign upgrades changing how your units look. You've heard it all before, and the list goes on and on and on. And I think this goes to the heart of why Manor Lords appeals to so many people, including myself. Because Manor Lords doesn't promise streamlining or faster ways to get to the epic heart of the experience. It doesn't tease you first and foremost with action, and it doesn't settle on abstractions or what could be described as settling on partly modern sensibilities like intended cartoony visuals or mechanical shortcuts. Because in my opinion, Manor Lords is taking the other route. It actually agrees with me that games are better when they give more, when they try to appear realistic, and when they offer the player the most amount of freedom to how they choose to play. You see, whether it's Manor Lord's point placement system which allows you to create natural differences in the same type of buildings, a world that actually looks like a realistic render of a forested region, a challenging approach to citizen management, where some families may become artisans and specialized workers, where it's possible to play around with roads and terrain to create interesting and varied city layouts, a multitude of resources and goods that build on each other, or indeed my personal favorite feature, the fact that your people make up your levy and that each soldier in turn may be outfitted with better armor depending on your own industry and how much you produce. These are features which take the player seriously, which take my need for granular gameplay seriously, and which adheres to a sense of authentic, historical immersion. And frankly, I don't think I'm the only one who's been longing for this, but it feels like a company like Creative Assembly believes this is a small audience for some reason. When judging by most parameters, Manor Lords has for all intents and purposes hit a peak player count, surpassed all but one Total War game in total concurrent players, exactly because of its virtually no compromise approach to historical city building and tactical strategy. And that's for an indie game and the first in its series, indeed the first game from its developer. And by the way, I want to set the record straight on this competition talk, because there are many ways of viewing products and their intent. Manor Lords is first and foremost a real-time city builder with real-time battle. Total War is first and foremost a turn-based grand strategy game with real-time battles. The creator of Manor Lords has stated several times that his game is not in direct competition with Total War. Now this is all well and good, and you've heard it many times. But the truth is that it doesn't have to be in direct competition to nevertheless compete with it. I mean, even though they are completely different games, Paradox's Crusader Kings still very much competes with Total War because of its grand campaign and historical setting, despite not featuring tactical battles in the same way at all. The way I see it when I compare Manor Lords and Total War then, is in the regard for historical detail and feel, how much I can immerse myself into this time period and its challenges and aesthetics, and how much I feel like my desires for a game in the historical city builder genre lines up with what the game designer and developers want. Are there cool hand-drawn building icons for my buildings? Or are they cartoony and mere symbols? Does the game allow me to tailor my experience in large part to the way I see fit? Or am I railroaded or restricted by arbitrary mechanics that seem to hinder my enjoyment more than help it blossom? Does the game feature battles I've seen many times before? Or does it change things up by appearing new and fresh in more ways than one, regardless of scale or regularity? And ultimately, every single one of us only have a certain number of hours in the day, and it's not like you're going to play two strategy games at once. If you are a fan of both, you're going to have to choose. Are you going to play Total War or Manor Lords? Now let me make something clear. I love Total War, so this whole spiel is not a dogpiling on those games. But from my point of view, while Total War made the choice to distance itself from what it used to be and from what I stayed so loyal to it for, namely the historical and the simulation-like approach to management and strategy, Manor Lords embraces it. In fact, it seems to take pride in it. Pride in how the wind flies through its banners carried by actual people, pride in the system that directly relates those people to the rest of your population and city, pride in how its complicated industrial sector intermingles with both the arming of your levy and the trade with other regions, pride in its music that feels distinctively medieval and importantly melodic, and vitally, pride in the player's freedom to explore and approach various situations differently and creatively. And I could be wrong here, but it seems to me that this is partially because of how Manor Lords is designed, namely largely by one unified vision, one that happens to coincide with mine, and one that longs for a more granular, personal, authentic, and down-to-earth experience. And that's not even to say that Manor Lords is the perfect game. I mean, it can't be, there is no such thing. And seeing as it launched into early access, it's even in a far from finished state, with quirks and snafus that will need to be ironed out. But what's so promising to me, and frankly what I always knew, is that when you show off a historical video game that oozes passion, immersion, detail, challenge, and freedom, people will show up for it. Because people are begging for it. Whether we are talking the history-inspired Mount and Blade Bannerlord, which shattered all records back in 2020 and is basically just a reskin away from being historical, Kingdom Come Deliverance, which went all in on a historical and authentic approach, the latter which just revealed its upcoming game, with even more of that by the way, Paradox games which continue to offer rich historical experiences on massive scales, and Total War itself, which is arguably the largest and most dominant strategy series out there. Even when it was just a historical franchise, the people love history, and crucially, being able to immerse themselves into that history. Coincidentally, this is what Manor Lords is offering, even if it happens to be on a smaller scale and launching without all the bells and whistles, which are likely to be present in the coming year or two. But even here, I think players appreciate the openness, the forthcomingness, and sincerity of a developer that keeps transparent, who talks to their audience about features or game design choices, and who do not seem stuck to an idea just because a committee decided that it had to be that way. And that's why I believe Manor Lords became so anticipated, and why it succeeded, even where the AAA games have either disappointed or failed. Let me know what you think of Manor Lords, your experience or hopes for it, and why it's captivated the minds of so many. And if you enjoyed the video, I sincerely hope you leave a like and subscribe to the channel. Thank you so much for watching, and I'll see you next time. Cheers!